And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What is up, everybody? Nick here from the P2W Fantasy podcast. Very excited today, November 16th. We just finished off week 10, heading into week 11 of an NFL season that seems to be flying by right now. Very, very excited to have two great guests on, both guests from the Undroppables team, which I continuously have said since the start of me being in the fantasy space is just a team that I have massive respect for. I can go down the list and vent off all the Undroppables members that I've had on the podcasts that were coming on my shows when I barely had any sort of a following. Just a great group of people that bring a bunch of different things to their brand there. So introduce both guests one at a time here. Very excited, like I said before. So first, I got Mike Reedy on the show. Mike, money makers and heartbreakers. That's your signature stamp for the Undroppables. I know you got that going on. I checked out the latest article, and you had some nice hits, man. You had Dak Prescott, the Ernest Johnson, Jamal Agnew, Tyler Conklin, Dan Arnold. You had some good hits in that piece there, and I know that's a DFS article that I click on almost every single week, regardless if I'm playing or not, because it's always interesting to see some guys to be aware of going into the week. But Mike, can you tell us where to find you for one, and then talk about what you do for the Undroppables and just in general as well?
Obviously, you can find me on the undroppables.com. Moneymakers and Heartbreakers is this thing I'm probably most well known for on Twitter. I do a thread, and I have the article that came out of that thread. That's how I ended up writing for the Undroppables. I do Untangling the Wire, which came out this morning as well for the waiver wire article. I'll be honest, last week I wish I took some more of my own advice from that DFS column, because I got my ass kicked relentlessly in DFS this past week. I think I won some snake drafts, but I did not win a single thing outside of that. And some of the guys I said to play, I couldn't fit in, and I wish I had run a different roster there. So when it's Mike Reedy at Twitter.
I get caught doing the same thing sometimes. Like I'll talk about this is a good streamer this week, and then I leave him on the bench for fantasy. It's obviously different, but then sometimes your own advice is the best one to run with sometimes. But very, very appreciative to get you on. My guy Kevin, who's on shows with me on Wednesdays, when I was asking like who's a good feature, he said your name, man. So I had to jump on his advice.
Deeply flattered. Kevin's a great guy. Thank you, Kevin. Good to be here, man. Super excited, Nick. I've been following you since you got started, and admired everything you've done all the way through, man. So
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. And second guest, Ashley, not your first time here on the show, but for those of you that do not know Ashley, again, a member of the Undroppables team, you have the Undroppables playbook. You're a co-host on that. Also really, really good TikTok content. I've been trying to dive in myself and try to grow a little bit there, but you had a video back in October that went over 40,000 views. I mean, you're really killing it there, and now you're co-hosting a show. So let everybody know again, where can we find you, and then what do you do? What you got going on?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be back. How much has changed since the first time I came? This was the first show I ever did, was coming on your show, and how much has changed since then. But you could find me on Twitter at Ashley_Marie, with 2 A's in Ashley. That's the easiest place to find me, where I interact with people the most. I do a little bit of writing for the Undroppables. That's on their website. You can find me running the TikTok at the Undroppables. That's some of my favorite work I do, because it's just so much fun. Like, it's just like silly, goofy videos that I just add some text over, and it's a lot of fun. But I co-host a football podcast called the Undroppables Playbook, where we basically look at the entire NFL from a football perspective rather than a fantasy perspective. We incorporate some fantasy in there, but football is really my big expertise, and I'm really good at fantasy, but football is like my true love. So I have a football podcast co-hosted with Michael Duncan, and that's a good time. That's live Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and streamable wherever you listen to your podcast.
Awesome. And again, under the Undroppables team, and it's very cool to see the diversity of content that's come out from Ashley and Mike and the rest of the team. So before we get into anything else tonight, I do want to say, as always, this show is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group. You can check out their website, fantasypoints.com/subscribe. They have a really good deal going on for a discount because we are X amount of weeks through the season. You can also use my promo code 21WIN10 to sign up for an additional discount. And again, I'm on there every single day looking at advanced data, but they have articles, they have other streaming services there as well. So go check out fantasypoints.com. And if you are tuning in, I have Mike and Ashley here. We're going to recap Week 10, but a lot of the questions that are recapping Week 10 kind of look forward as well to the rest of the season. We have some nice questions here to cover, little round circle of some thoughts. Stick with us here.
To win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right, so just finished Week 10. The first question I have to throw out there is for you guys, and we'll go Mike, Ashley, and then I'll throw my thoughts in, and we can talk about each other's answers here. But which performance from Week 10 do you think is a good sign for a jump in their fantasy stock for the rest of the season? So the performance kind of gives you those flashing red lights that, hey, this might be something for the long run here. What's one performance that comes to mind for you, Mike?
AJ Dillon for me. I know Aaron Rodgers was dinged up and not playing, but Dillon had the 21 carries, 66 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But I was more impressed with the 2 receptions for 62 yards as well. They're putting them in space. Let's face it, they don't have a hell of a lot of fantasy options on that Packers team. You know, you have Adams, Jones, Dillon, and so talent everywhere else as far as who Aaron Rodgers can get the ball to. I think we're going to see a lot more of AJ Dillon even with Aaron Jones in the lineup, right? So he's someone I think he's rostered on like 80 or 90% of teams in leagues in both ESPN and Yahoo, I know. So it's not like you can go grab him, but that's a guy whose stock's going up, and I think we're going to see people playing him a lot more the rest of the season versus just trying to hold him as a backup and handcuff to Aaron Jones.
Yeah, and you saw throughout the season as well. I mean, he had a couple games where Aaron Jones was out there, but he was getting enough touches to be almost flex worthy. So now he gets that additional role where we're not going to have Aaron Jones for a couple weeks. And I was listening to the ESPN show Fantasy Focus, I believe, and Stefania Bell, she was talking about the Packers traditionally. They don't rush anybody back in, especially if they look like they're going to be a playoff team. So we might be seeing a lot of AJ Dillon when we think that Aaron Jones is coming back in 2 weeks. It might be maybe 4 weeks before he's back to getting the full workload. So definitely could be a handful of weeks if you rostered him that he can definitely be very useful for fantasy. Ashley, any thoughts on AJ Dillon? And then let us know your pick for a player that shows signs of continued positive momentum here in the season after this last week.
Yeah, so that was my answer too. I actually didn't look at the joint show sheet so that I didn't get swayed and try to pick my own answers, but that was my answer too.
Great minds.
Because for me, it's like he opens up the playbook a lot. I think I really don't want to call him a gadget guy, but like they're using him in roles that kind of expand the playbook. And that is kind of what they need to elevate this offense to super deep contention for, playoffs. So I think that they're going to use him a lot more in a lot of different roles, which I think is very enticing for fantasy. Like you said, Mike, for, receptions, I think was the big perk of this week. And I think he's kind of just established himself as not really a backup, not really a handcuff, more as like a steady flex option. And he is just like very talented. I think that at the end of the day, that's what it is. You could see that he has a lot of pure raw talent. So even when Jones comes back, that he'll still be incorporated into this offense a decent amount.
And the last just kind of side note is, we see often guys get banged up and then the waiver wire show the next week shows the backup running back is this guy that's going to have some stock, but it's very different backfield to backfield. I mean, this is a guy that some people might view as a starter elsewhere. So definitely excited to see him get rolling. I haven't really been as high on him, but I think this year is kind of proving me wrong because he's doing well with the touches that he is getting.
I wasn't that high on him either until this year when they started giving him the touches, right? And, thank you, Ashley, for the positive confirmation. You made me feel good about it.
There you go. Mine, it's not a sleeper guy or anything like that, and it's not a guy that's not a big name, but I'm hoping that Stephon Diggs gets rolling a little bit more than he has this season. And I'm complaining about a guy who right now is the wide receiver 12. But I think the difference for me is looking at last year where he was. At this point last year, he did play one more game, but from weeks 1 through 10 last year, he was the wide receiver 1. So obviously that changed as the season went on. But that's kind of what my expectation of him was going into this year, that he could be a top 3 guy and he'd be putting up these huge numbers. He had more games last season up to this point, over 20 fantasy points. He also had bigger games in the receiving yard department. So he is number 6 in targets. He is number 7 in receiving yards. But up to this point last year, we just saw a series of games with more fantasy points, more receiving yards. So I'm hoping that after this week, he had 8 catches, 13 targets, 162 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I'm hoping this is the Stephon Diggs that we're going to see more of, instead of like a guy that's been floating around that 15-point fantasy, outing range. So I'm hoping that we get back to that top 3 guy. You guys can spit out any thoughts on Stephon Diggs before we keep going.
After you, Ash.
Yeah, I think this Bills offense as a whole has been kind of slow to a fantasy start. Like, besides Josh Allen, and even Josh Allen has had a lot of really strange low point weeks. So they've been, or like mediocre, right? Like not the Bills offense that we know and love in fantasy. So I think that's been a huge thing kind of to get them rolling. But I'm hoping it was like a little bit of a slump confidence thing for Stephon Diggs, and that this is the spark that gets him out of that.
I hope so too. I had him as my wide receiver 1 coming into the season, like overall wide receiver 1. So I was kind of surprised by this, where he is right now as well. I'm a Patriots fan, but AFC East, I watch all the teams really hardcore. So I really love what the Bills have done. What I'm seeing is Josh Allen spreading the ball around really well, right? So like, I have a DFS podcast with one of my friends as well, and he calls me a Cole Beasley guy. But I only pick Beasley on weeks I know he's going to get fed the ball, right? Yeah. Allen spreading the ball around really, really well, and with guys like Dawson Knox showing he can produce, Emmanuel Sanders on the team now. There's a lot of options, so the ball's getting spread around a lot more and a lot better. Because
even Isaiah McKenzie this week.
Yes. Oh man, that kid's talented though too. He's just not as talented as some of those other guys. They have a lot of talent there. I'm really hoping Stephon Diggs gets to stress that alpha in him and break out too. Just because I loved what they're doing with their team, and I think if he's producing at that high level we hoped he would, their team's even better. If he's not, they're good, but they're not real Super Bowl contenders. So I thought they were going to be. And I really think this might be the spark that gets them going. And they actually need a spark to get going because my Patriots are coming up behind them now, right? And I want to see a big push between the two of them for an exciting stretch run here before the playoffs.
Yeah, don't sleep on that team. Don't sleep on that team because they might not look on paper sometimes as like the sexiest of rosters, but man, that team, they're playing well. You guys are playing very well right now. We'll go the opposite. We'll go the opposite direction now. So again, we talked about big performance. This is a good sign moving forward. Now let's look at a big performance from week 10 that you feel we should not overhype. We'll start, Ashley, with you on this one. Big performance that we shouldn't overhype right now.
Yeah, I'll actually stick with the Bills, and I'm going to stick with Matt Breida, who had 3 carries for 28 yards, 1 touchdown, and 18 fantasy points. That's a lot from him. I think the key takeaway from this is that we really shouldn't trust any of the Bills running backs to like get us any amount of points on a steady week. It seems to be a little bit of a confusing backfield, but like I'm not rushing right now. Like, oh my God, need to have him, like that type of thing. I think it was just a really good week. They were playing the Jets, and the Jets defense is absolutely disgusting. So I just think this one's kind of the fluke. I would prefer to have Singletary or Moss on my roster rather than Matt Breida, even though I do have a Matt Breida on one of my rosters. But
and the funny thing, again, you mentioned he had 6 total touches. The last time that he touched the football was week 1. He hasn't played since week 1. And it is frustrating because the matchup looked pretty juicy for the other two guys. I mean, I actually had some faith in Zach Moss, but he was slow coming back. I think he had the concussion that he was coming back from, and I think he only carried the ball 7 times. So, Mike, any thoughts on Breida and then your guy that we should go fight about?
He was a candidate for me as well. There was a few guys this week, right, where either they hadn't touched the ball all season and they had what looked like a big breakout game, but we're not going to see any more from them. Breida's one of those guys. I looked to me like they were slowly trying to bring Moss back in after the concussion. Maybe they should have held him out another week if they weren't going to play him at all, because he appears to be the best running back on the team. Breida's, he's done stuff here and there throughout his career. I wouldn't go heavily investing in him. I may have mentioned him in my waiver article, but I know I didn't write about him. Right? It's somebody you might want to consider, but I'm not.
I think too, it might have been that it's like, the more I think about it, like it is the Jets, and like the Bills were sitting in first place pretty, and like even with the backup Bills team, I think they could beat the starters in the Jets defense. So I think it might have just been that they were keeping their other two healthy and keeping Moss kind of for this, bigger return to play next week.
Why risk a hit to the head, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's pointless. You're going to win the game anyways.
Yep.
Mike, who was your guy for somebody we shouldn't overhype? He had a good week in week 10, but let's not get carried away.
As I said, I had a bunch I could have went with. I went with Kendrick Bourne. He had 4 receptions for 98 yards and a TD. He rushed 3 times for 43 yards, 7 touches. That's all he had. He was super efficient, which I love because I'm a Patriots fan, right? And I hate to say this, but in the redraft royalty, which is a Twitter analyst league I'm 10-0, and it's because I did some play and pray guys, of which Kendrick Bourne was one of them. I played him and I prayed.
He's a steady start for me in my dynasty league. Like he starts every week.
Well, you must have a lot of wide receivers, a lot of starting roster spots, right?
Yeah.
So I can see that there. But if you're talking like a redraft league or something, I wouldn't go crazy over this. He's going to do things like this here and there, and then there's going to be weeks where he's not going to produce that great. It's just how the Patriots offense works. But super efficient this week, and I did love it. I just don't see that happening every week.
Yeah, and you look back to week 7, kind of similar note outside of a touchdown, 4 for 4, 4 targets, 4 catches, had some decent yardage. But the thing that kind of is iffy for me is out of the last 4 weeks, 3 out of 4, he's only had 4 total targets. So if this was a guy that out of nowhere had 12 targets and then the next week he had 8 targets, then we might be saying, hey, man, this guy's getting really involved. He's getting some more looks, but it's tough. It's tough right now. This game for the Patriots, for him, Aguilar, and Jacoby Myers, they all had 4 targets, which maybe if you are rostering, Jacoby Myers, you don't want to see that. Nelson Aguilar, I think, has been a little disappointing just because he had some really nice games last year. But I'm with you. Until you see a steady increase in usage, I guess if he's maybe a guy in deeper league, like Ashley said, then you have some faith. But
I
Ashley,
think one of my things with it too, sorry, I cut you off, but one of my things with it too is that it's been this like steady like carousel of like plug and play for the Patriots on receivers. They have them. I think I saw a stat that was like none of them goes over 70%. Can't remember if it was snap or target share, but it seems like they're all kind of rotating around pretty frequently at the same pace. I think for me, it's that it's trying to figure out what's working for Mac Jones, right? Because it's a whole new offense. It's a whole new quarterback. So if this is something Mac Jones goes in and loves and says, having him out there made me feel a little bit more comfortable, then I think that's when we're going to see that bump for Kendrick Bourne. It could be next week, it could be next season, but you always keep an eye on that, because I think if he even has a little bit of an increase, it's probably because it's working with Mac Jones, and then I would pick him up and play him every week.
So here's the you brought it up. Here's the snap percentage the last couple weeks. This past week, 43%. Then it was 53 the week before, 30 the week before that, and then 54 the week before that. So it's really kind of lingering a little bit. It's been up and down, but yeah, I think that's a good sign, and that's something. I mean, you can go check that out on Sleeper. They show you the snap percentage, but I think once he gets into the green, I think the green's usually like over 65%. Week 3 was the last time he was over 70%. So something to monitor.
Yeah, that's none of the Patriots receivers really have been over 70, which is interesting.
Not at all. Yep. My guy. So you guys can give me some pushback about this, because I'm not knocking this guy. I actually did knock this guy when he got his first start this season for the Browns. And I said, I don't expect him to get 11 points. And then he got like 10 on his first play. And I had all these people on Twitter. They were like, kind of ripping into me a little bit. And I apologize. I'm like, that was a big whiff, which a lot of people don't do. I did it. I said I whiffed. But Ernest Johnson, he's been impressive. He's had 2 games of over 22 fantasy points across the last 4 weeks when he does get the touches. What's the reason I don't want to get too overhyped is because when Nick Chubb alone is out there, he's not getting enough touches to be even flex worthy, because I think some people have thrown out there the idea that when Nick Chubb's out there and Kareem Hunt is still not in the mix, that Ernest Johnson might get enough touches to be like a Kareem Hunt and be able to be in the flex. But the last 2 games that Nick Chubb was healthy, weeks 8 and 9, he only totaled 13 touches to Nick Chubb's 33. So it's not enough for me. I know it's a good offensive line and they love to run the ball, but you got to factor in Nick Chubb should probably be back this week. And then you got Kareem Hunt, who I'm not entirely sure of the timeline, but once he is back, now Ernest Johnson's the third running back. And if he wasn't getting enough touches to be consistently relevant as a second, then I'm concerned for anything to be hyped up moving forward. So I almost want to say that if people have that mentality that he's going to be the Kareem Hunt until Kareem Hunt comes back, he might be a sell candidate. And I'm not a big, sell high, buy low, that sort of thing. But that's some of my thoughts. But Mike, Ashley, am I being too pessimistic about his value moving forward?
Go ahead, Mike.
No, you're not. So I say things a lot on Twitter and my articles and on my podcast, right? Coaching matters, play calling matters. Ernest Johnson is great when he's the only running back there. I had him as a moneymaker this week because he's getting 100% of the touches, 100% of the snaps. I'm sorry. I'm like old. I still work out though, and I can still run. That offensive line's really good, and the play calling's to run the ball all the time. Now, I would get killed because I'm old, but if you put a young running back in there who's worth anything in the NFL, they were going to produce just because that's what they do. That's the play calling they have. He's the third running back on this team. Once Hunt's back and Chubb's back, he's going to just fade back into his role as a third stringer, waiting again to get his chance. I mean, he did it. I think he did a good job with it, but I can't compare him to either one of those other 2 guys. They're both very dynamic, and I see him as just another guy, right? And in a good situation. So I agree with you.
I think on any other team, he would probably be like a steady RB2. Like, I think he would put up decent numbers. I don't think he's ever going to be like a real RB1 on a team. I think he could be an RB2. I think he's the perfect sell candidate, actually. I think you could get a decent amount for him right now, especially with this like narrative of the Browns' other running backs are chronically injured, right? Like so it's, if you don't expect to play him again on a week that's not like a week like this, I would totally hand him off to someone else I think you could get a decent amount. I don't think you're being too pessimistic, Nick. I think the numbers tell a story, and when anybody else is there, his numbers decrease. So that's kind of just the picking order of what that Browns offense and running back room looks like.
think we are all on the same page, and
Yep.
you know, hats off to him for the performances he has had.
Yeah.
But getting the touches, but at the same time, you still have to go out and do it. So all for that. Switch gears here again, recapping week 10, but still kind of looking forward here. I'll start this one off, but this one is who had a bad performance that we should not be worried about, because we often see that in fantasy. Somebody has a bust week, and then everybody starts to throw out some hot takes. Is this guy a drop candidate? Should we sell him? A lot of overreaction sometimes, and this one hurt. It hurt. I actually lost a matchup by 3 points, and I had him playing in this one. But Mike Gesicki, I know a lot of people are not the biggest fans of him, but I will say he has been very good this season, though. He's still the tight end 3 despite having a goose egg. If the goose egg that he had 0 to 3 targets, then I'd be a little bit more worried. He did have 7, and I didn't go back and replay. I know I think he had like at least 2 drops in that one. But I'm not as concerned because he still was getting the 7 targets. He's had 4 games of 16 plus fantasy points. He's had 6 games of 7 plus targets. He's one of the most targeted tight ends in the league. So for redraft purposes, I'm not concerned. If I saw a big dip in his target share or the routes that he was running or the fantasy weeks he was having, then I'd be like, I don't know if we can play this guy right now. But for me, unless you have Kelsey and Pitts and Waller and you can go down the list of some other guys that are very, very consistent, then I'm still fine if Mike Gesicki is your tight end to plug him in and play. I don't think you bench him because of this week, just because, again, targets to me for the tight end position are everything. Ashley gave the thumbs down, so I need Gesicki thoughts, and then going to your guy afterwards here.
Gesicki is literally my arch enemy. So I will never have Mike Gesicki in a league ever. I will never trust Mike Gesicki ever. I think trusting Mike Gesicki is a character flaw. I do not like him at all. But he lost me at a fantasy championship one year. So
okay. So now it's starting to come together.
Yeah, I understand. I understand his numbers have been good. With the constant switch of quarterbacks lately, I don't know that I trust that. I think that's one of my biggest issues with trusting him currently, is because I can't remember which of the two it is, but one of them targets him a lot more than the other one does. So keep an eye on that. I think that's the big thing. For me, I will stick with a tight end. The bad performance that we shouldn't be worried about, I think, is TJ Hawkinson. He took 67 snaps, ran 23 routes. He was only targeted once, which is crazy because he's like the best receiving option on that team, like the only receiving option on that team. But I think that game was like a black hole, and whatever was like destined to happen. I don't understand what went on in that game. It was an eyesore, and so is his big fat goose egg. Hawkinson only missed 4 of the snaps, was taken out for 4 of the snaps. He ran a route on 79% of the passing plays. So his numbers still look good. I just think this was a bad game script and just their game plan all along, which strange, but I do think that this is not something we should be worried about.
And it's funny too, because the game plan ended up resulting in a tie. So it sounds like they had
their losing streak is over.
Yeah, it is. And one target in that game, week 8, week 6 had 11 targets in those games. He's been interesting this year because he went through a span weeks 3 through 5 where he was under 9 fantasy points, but then the first 2 weeks he was above 20. So the ceiling's definitely there. You have these oddball weeks. Mike, we got 2 tight ends that we both have mentioned here. Any thoughts on any?
Up from there, but Mike Gesicki sounded. It's like he wanted to be Irish this week. Mike Gesicki, with his Ofer game. The switch in the quarterback during the game probably doesn't help him as well. So, you guys played at least catch with a football, right? You're going from Prescott at righty to a lefty. The ball spins a different way. It comes in at a different angle. So, during the game, I'm going to give Gesicki a pass this game. He had 2 quarterbacks. They both target him a lot, by the way. I think Brissett targets more than Tua does. But if you've ever heard wide receivers talk about things like this, when switching from a right-handed quarterback to a left-handed quarterback, they'll tell you the ball comes in at the wrong angle, the ball spinning the wrong way, because most quarterbacks are righties, right? So those little things actually make a big difference when you're catching the football. So I'm going to give Kaseki a pass this week. I didn't lose any fantasy championships with him, so he's not a heartbreaker for me, right?
A little difference there.
Yeah, Hawkinson, I'll give a break as well. The Lions just got their asses kicked this week. I expect more from Goff. Maybe I like him a little bit more than other people do because I know he's talented, but I don't know. The lack of wide receiver help there is really hurting that team all the way around. And I went with wide receivers, by the way, for my pick, and I went with 2 not 1 because I'm going to talk about a whole passing game. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, they combined for 5 receptions and 49 yards.
Not good.
Come on, right? But the good news is Wilson's back. It was his first game back from his injury, and he injured his hand too. It was in the cold. It was in Lambeau Field. The Packers' defense is actually a lot better than most people think. They have a good defense. I think their game's going to come up from here with Wilson back. There's not a lot of branches on this passing tree, so the volume's going to be there for both guys. If I was looking to acquire, say, a wide receiver now for this stretch run and the playoff run, these are guys I would look to attain, both Lockett and Metcalf. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I have a question for you guys. Do you think that Russell Wilson, and I can know nothing about this, and I'm not a doctor, I got no kind of knowledge like that, but do you think that he might have come back too early? I saw something along those lines. I think just reading up on some stuff, and it was interesting to see that his tight end, he targeted more than anybody. Gerald Everett had a great day. He had 8 targets, 8 catches, but it's almost like that was like a safety blanket. And to be fair, I usually watch like Red Zone and like NFL Network, so there's different things going on. So I'm not studying the film at all. I'm looking at the stats and the highlights, right? But I almost wonder if maybe he wasn't completely ready. So, and if that's the case, you're hoping he's ready now, in that we have nothing to worry about. But yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't think he should have came back this week. I think it was just like we're playing Aaron Rodgers, we're playing the Packers. We have to move up in the standings in the division. I think it kind of is like a little bit of rust. I mean, anybody gets rusty when they don't do anything for a handful of weeks. But I also think it's like all the stories about how much he did PT, you could overdo PT and that could be it. So I think it's just going to take a little bit of adjusting. I think he probably came back a little bit too soon, but I think no matter when he came back, there was going to be a little bit of rust. So I think the rust is kind of knocked off, and I expect to be back to pre-finger injury Russell Wilson.
And I like the call too on the wide receivers, because I don't think that unless you have a really, really deep team, you maybe are looking at Lockett, and I know he's frustrating at times because we know he has these up and down games. I love DK Metcalf. I love DK Metcalf. So I'm never questioning him. I think he's unbelievably talented, stupid athletic. So I'm with you, Mike, and I'm not worried there, especially with him.
We lost the host. This is our show now.
And I did it again. I did this a couple weeks ago. So what happened was, just on a side note before we move forward. So I'm swiping. I usually have my notes printed off, just the show sheet and everything. Yeah. Printer wasn't working at work today, so I just go on a different screen. So I swipe it. So I swipe myself completely out of the stream. But I'm back. I don't know if one of you guys took control for 5 seconds.
To take over.
I told everyone it was our show now.
Yeah. All right. I figured somebody would take the lead as the main host, and then the other would be the co-host. But we're all good. I'll be careful with the swipe here. All right. Moving forward here, and I'm back. I won't swipe out. So we said bad performance that we shouldn't be worried about. Now the opposite, like I said before, bad performance that is concerning. And Mike, we can start with you on this one. Who had a bad game in week 10 that you are actually concerned about?
All right, so this is a guy I had as a moneymaker in my article, by the way. I thought he was going to have a really good week playing against the Dallas Cowboys because they suck against quarterbacks for the most part. But Matt Ryan, oh my God, his schedule's bad the rest of the way. It looks like his wide receivers are all bad. Patterson's hurt now. I mean, he has the Patriots week 11, the Panthers week 14, Lions week 16, Bills week 17. His only easy matchup is probably against Tampa Bay on the week 13. Between the lack of skilled players and the rough schedule, like just yuck, right? Like I want nothing to do with him anywhere, not in DFS. If he's on your roster as your backup quarterback, because he's probably not your starter, just cut him. No reason to keep him around.
Yeah, and I'm guilty too, because I came out with a video before the week started, and it was like a TikTok video and that I put on Twitter, and I was like, players that can smash their projections, and he was my quarterback that I mentioned because the week prior against New Orleans, 28.52 fantasy points. He threw for 76.7% completion rate. I mean, he had 2 touchdowns. He looked really good. He rushed for a touchdown. But now, like you mentioned, the schedule doesn't look great. I mean, I guess they play Jacksonville in week 12, but a few weeks ago when he did play against Carolina, he had 6 fantasy points, just over 6 fantasy points. So I'm with you. I'm with you because I thought it was a good matchup as well. I thought he had some good momentum, and the fact that he kind of busted like this, I don't know. I think there's other guys that could be better streaming options moving forward.
You forget that this is the Matt Ryan experience, though.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I mean, that is extremely true because we saw some of the highs and lows. The first game of the season, 7.36 fantasy points. I mean, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Ashley, any other Matt Ryan thoughts? And then let us know about another guy that you think had a bad week. We should be concerned.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for Matt Ryan. You said everything that needs to be said. I think his remaining strength of schedule is and that's enough for me. I probably wouldn't feel comfortable starting him against anybody other than the Jags. For me, Pat Freiermuth, because there's a lot that's a little bit concerning there. He had 6.1 fantasy points. I think the general numbers themselves looked good, but the fantasy production wasn't there. And with Eric Ebron coming back, it's a huge decrease from the last handful of weeks that we've seen from Mr. Muth. And I think, too, is you couldn't produce with a quarterback that, not saying he's good, but it's a quarterback that actually has an arm, right? Like Big Ben can't throw it, and you could get fantasy production, and now you have a quarterback who's definitely a little bit better with throwing the ball, and you still can't produce. I think the huge thing for me is Ebron coming back definitely hurt that fantasy score, and that's something that's concerning for me.
I do like Big Pat. I will say
I love him I love him in Dynasty too, but I think for regular redrafts that are a little bit shallow, I would be pretty concerned and looking for another option.
His snap percentage did decrease. He was in the 70 range weeks 8 and 9, and then week 10, 62%, and that was a game that went to overtime too. I still do have faith because the targets are there, but at the same time, sometimes we mentioned before the quarterback changes could be changes for other things. And even if, let's say, Mason Rudolph, let's say you can push the ball down the field more than Big Ben, but maybe Big Ben, his efficiency to that specific player is better. Mike, what's your thoughts on Pat Freiermuth?
It must have been all because of Ray McLeod, right? I mean, there's 12 targets.
Kryptonite.
I was waiting to see Twitter explode with "Go ahead, Ray." It didn't, thank God. But I have concerns. So I have Pat on a couple of teams where I was tight end needy, right, and super excited. As soon as people coming back from being healthy, and then Roethlisberger's not playing, I had concerns immediately because quarterbacks know who they trust with the ball, and the backup comes in, and who's he trusting? He's trusting some of the backup players, that wide receiver, because he plays with them all the time. They have the chemistry. So I think that also played a pretty big part here as well in hurting Pat. When Ben's back, we'll get to see what's really going to happen a little bit better. Big Ben isn't really that big. He's turning into a noodle arm, kind of like Peyton Manning was.
Has been noodle arm.
Yeah. Manning was like that for his last two or three seasons too. So it happens.
In the not to make fun of the guy or anything, but speaking of noodle arm, I think it was 2 games ago where he shifted out of the pocket upwards a little bit, and he went to gun the ball down the field, and the guy had to come back 10 yards to go and grab it. So That'll be interesting.
That was on ESPN quite a bit. That play.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Looked like he was going to throw it out of the stadium, but I don't think there was any win that day either, so nothing to blame there. The Ray McLeod point, though, good point, because I saw that elsewhere as well, that they said, why did Mason Rudolph go to this guy so much? And that, other people are saying, well, he practices with the second team that he is on, so of course he's going to the guy that he throws to every day.
No, clearly Ray is the best wide receiver on the team. I mean,
obviously.
He might have the coolest name, so I mean, he's got that going for him. All right. So tonight we know is the big wake up at 2-3 a.m. and check your phone real quick to see if you hit on the waivers. It's a big time for everybody. Week to week it's sometimes a little bit deeper than other times. I still think that there's some good options that are still under 50%. I always look at ESPN because I feel like a lot of casual fantasy players are on ESPN. If you try to look on Sleeper, you got these people that are in, dynasty leagues, like Ashley said, where she's starting Kendrick Bourne as her wide receiver 2 or 3 sometimes. I don't know. But big question, number one waiver wire priority. So who is a player that you feel if you had to spend the money, this is the one person you are going for if you didn't have them? So you might have 100 shares of this player, but if you didn't have the player, who would it be today if you are submitting a waiver move? Ashley, who comes to mind?
I think one of the ones that comes to mind for me is Jacksonville tight end Dan Arnold. I think it's pretty clear that he is one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite, absolute favorite targets. He has a 20% target share in the last handful of, I think it's 2 games. PFF had him at an 80% for utilization. He runs a target per route at 20%, but he's also averaging 11.7 yards per reception. I think it's a really good ad if you're a little bit tight end needy, if you're in a little bit deeper league. Like, I would not play Dan Arnold over some of those top 10 tight ends probably, but he is somebody I would look to pick up in a handful of my a little bit bigger leagues.
In the targets, I use targets for the tight end position nonstop on this podcast today and others, but that's literally the number one thing I'm looking for. I mean, if they're not efficient with them, that's one thing. But I did take some. I'm looking at my phone here. Quick notes. I thought he was like the tight end. I thought he was like the tight end 3 or something along those lines the last 3 weeks. I mean, he's been good. He's been good. 10, 7, and 7 for the targets the last 3 weeks. So he's really involved. 13.7 this last game. So I do like that move as well, because we're seeing
offense is starting to work.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah. Well, some of the guys were kind of.
I'm not saying fully. It's still Jacksonville, but
yeah, that's true. Mike, any thoughts on Dan Arnold, and then give us your number one waiver guy today?
So Dan's someone I've written up in Untangling the Wire 3 weeks in a row, and prior to that, he was one of the guys who you may also want to consider. 24 targets over the last 3 games. That's a 20% target share in that team. He surpassed 60 yards in each of those games. He's probably going to be a TE1 the rest of the way. So, if you're worried about Pat Fryermuth and you want a replacement, this guy's out there in a lot of leagues, Dan Arnold is. I can't believe it because, a lot of teams are TE needy. So it's shocking to me that this guy's still out there.
27.3% on ESPN.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously my readership isn't big enough. 26% rostered on Yahoo as well, by the way. 18% on Sleeper redraft. One thing you might not know is if you look on a dynasty team and a redraft team and Sleeper, they'll have different percentages for ownership based on.
I did not know this.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that
at
all.
I only play in Dynasty on Sleeper. That might be why I didn't know that, but I didn't know that.
You want some more nerd knowledge from me? If you're playing on Yahoo and you wake up at 3:30 in the morning after waivers have ticked off that they're going to process, any players that aren't claimed can be added outside of the waiver process then.
So set your alarms.
So if you if nobody's claiming somebody and they're there, it's green. It's good to go for you at 3:30.
There you go. My typical alarm's 4:30, so I think I'll beat some people around here at least.
Yeah, I discovered
you would beat me by many hours.
Many hours.
I discovered the Sleeper thing by accident. I had somebody picking on my article, telling me my percentages were wrong. And I said, are you playing Dynasty or Redraft? And he said, Dynasty. I said, all right, I'll go look and see on one of my Dynasty teams and look on one of my Redraft teams because I based it off of a Redraft team. But there's a difference. Sleepers, I sometimes pick on them because I think some of the stuff they do is goofy. But the app overall, especially if you're playing Dynasty, is the best out there, right?
I tried to move my family league to Sleeper, but we play on ESPN because it's a lot of people who really don't know fantasy, and that's what my family league is. So we didn't move over to Sleeper.
My personal feelings are: you want to be playing on Yahoo or Sleeper, one or the other, nowhere else.
Yep, ESPN. I'm sick of ESPN, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, so they just haven't changed the app.
No.
So I'm big on the Dan Arnold ad. Had a lot of tweets back and forth with Jax Falcone this morning in regards to it. We feel people don't want him because his name is so boring. They want somebody exciting.
You want Ray McLeod.
Ray McLeod. or Ramondre Stevenson, who's going to be the number one ad this week.
Cool name.
This is why I'm talking about him. I'm not adding him anywhere he's available, by the way, because I have a lot of Harris in my rosters. But, he averaged 5 yards per carry for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he had 4 receptions for 14 yards. If he's going to be the only guy in the backfield and he's going to get this kind of volume, he's going to produce for the Patriots, right? So with Harris back this week because he practiced today, Stevenson's not going to get this kind of volume again. He may have a role now, but he's not going to get this kind of volume. And Belichick doesn't often go to a rookie like this. So I'm a little shocked he got so much playing time, but he's going to be the person you're going to see everybody add. So technically he's the number one waiver wire ad for the week.
Ashley, any thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson?
Yeah, I'm another person who has Damien Harris. Literally everywhere I could get him, I drafted him, I'm pretty sure, in all but one of my leagues, I think. And that was just because I wasn't able to get him. I like Ramondre. I think I might pick him up in a small few places. I'm not doing it overall, again, because this is kind of the Bill Belichick experience. But it's not something that it's like we're looking back and being like, we were so wrong. I just think we were right that Ramondre Stevenson is really good. But we're right that I think Damien Harris is still the RB1 going forward. I don't really think this changes too much. I think he might eat in a little bit at snap share and taking away a little bit of carries, but I don't think it's not going to be like this every week. I think the Patriots offense cooking is a good sign. I'm not telling you not to pick him up because he is a good have if you're very RB needy. The Patriots offense being able to start putting up very good numbers, and Mac Jones being very good now, like I will call him very good, is a good sign for you to pick him up. I do think that it's not a bad idea to pick him up. But for me personally, I have a lot of Damien Harris. I love Ramondre Stevenson though. So I think also he's a great have in Dynasty. If you don't have him yet, because Damien Harris's contract year is next year. So Damien Harris will be playing for his contract, but you never know. I mean, if Ramondre Stevenson is this good as a rookie, it could be that they just send off Damien Harris somewhere or they send Ramondre somewhere. So I think Ramondre Stevenson's a great pickup. And if you have a smaller Dynasty league that you can grab him in.
Yeah, and I think for people that already roster him and might have picked him up as they saw that he was starting, their big hot take might be that he's going to win this job. But I think what's realistic is that he had this huge performance and then he earned himself some more touches. So even if he's a second guy, if he was getting 5 carries before, maybe he's getting 9 carries and 2 catches or something like that. So if he earned himself some more touches, he's actually been pretty efficient in some games with limited touches. Week 6 versus Dallas, he had 8 total touches, 15.2 fantasy points. And then the week before this explosion, 12 touches for 12.6 fantasy points. So over a fantasy point per touch. So he's actually been efficient in some games. So if he earns himself 10, 12 touches now, that might be potentially flex worthy in the right matchup. But I think he's definitely a guy to pick up because, again, we see these backups come in and they're either really good or they're just okay. And he's a guy that was really, really good last week. And my guy to finish this segment off, my number one waiver wire guy or priority, I keep saying guy all the time, but waiver wire priority is, and I know he's gotten a lot of hype, but I have been putting him on my waiver wire videos every single week for the last handful of weeks now, and it's just Rashad Bateman. And I know a lot of people have been spicing him up, but we just look at the targets. Week 6 and 7, 6 targets. Weeks 8 and 9, 8 targets. 2 out of 4 games that he's played in the NFL this year, 80 receiving yards. He had 14 points last game. I look at him not just as a waiver target, but I also look at him as a trade target. I think he just looks, just from watching the game, I think he just looks the part. He looks really good on the field. He's making plays. He's handling volume. I want him to be on the field a little bit more. It seemed like at the beginning of that last Ravens game, they were starting to feed Rashad Bateman at the very end of the game. They had Watkins out there running around, and I think he fumbled or something like that. But I really, really like Rashad Bateman, and I think he's a guy that is going to transition into a starting player for fantasy for the rest of the year. In my opinion, will he have some down weeks? Sure, but I think that he is going to be flex worthy for the rest of the season. Maybe it's a little hot takey, but I really like their first round draft pick. Mike and then Ashley, any Bateman thoughts? I know he's been the hot commodity of Twitter, but he's been a good pickup.
I have him starting on a team already.
Same.
So I like him. I'm super excited to see Lamar Jackson be so efficient in the passing game, by the way. He's a kid I love, right? He's just such a good kid. When you hear stories about things he does after games and stopping to sign autographs and talking to people, like you want to see somebody like that be successful, right? And he leaves it on the field. He plays to win. There's never a moment, that he's not trying to win the goddamn game. So I love this kid. I love that they have this complimentary player, and I think it helps Hollywood as well. So, I like it a lot. They've been trying to find somebody complimentary in the passing game to help open things up for Brown and for Andrews, and this is the guy. He's so smooth on the field too. This is the guy. He's for real.
Yep. I talk a lot about the reason I enjoy playing fantasy football is because I love watching football and I love watching players. Like I want to have players on my team that I love to watch. And he's one of those guys that's just so fun to watch. Like watching his routes is so enjoyable as a football fan. So I really like him. I think he's really good. Like you said, Reedy, I think Duncan and I have talked about it a lot on the podcast, but having a very good like wide receiver 2 and 3 helps those wide receiver 1s do so much better. On an offense where you have only a really like a stud wide receiver 1 and then mediocre wide receiver 2 and 3s, wide receiver 1s just don't produce as much. And it's like they should, because they should have all the targets, or they're just not as efficient with producing. Like there's once you add in elite and very good wide receiver 2s and 3s, it helps that wide receiver 1, and it helps elevate an offense too. So I think he is just going to open up the Ravens passing game even more than it already has been this year.
Yeah, he keeps growing every week as far as his involvement. And you both said it, and I completely agree. But they did a phenomenal job in this draft by drafting a guy that complements their other guy and complements their system. They could have got another speedy guy that's a downfield threat and is super agile, but it's not really a possession guy. And they went out and grabbed Rashad Bateman.
They learned from the Chiefs' mistake, right? Like you keep getting super fast guys, and they're not necessarily helping your top guy at all, and they're not producing.
It's a great point.
They built a good team. The Ravens. That's another team. In all honesty, if they're not playing the Patriots, I'll be rooting for throughout the playoffs, because I just love some of those guys so much, and they're not in trouble off the field, and they play to win. It's tough to not like that team. Just tough to not like them.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing, you don't have to dive super, super deep into it, but I feel like I'm going to start asking this to people once a week for a hot take for this coming week, just so if it hits, you won't have to victory lap it. I'll just clip it and I'll shout you guys out. But give me one hot take heading into week 11. It could be anything that we can. I'll victory lap it for you guys if it hits. But Ashley, what's your hot take for week 11?
I think George Kittle finishes as the tight end 1 on the week.
Okay, George Kittle, tight end 1 for the week, says Ashley. Mike, what's your hot take for the week?
I got hot takey for the rest of the season because that's what you wrote down, right?
Oh,
You did
all
write
right.
that.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Dak Prescott will be the best quarterback week in and week out for the rest of the season. His schedule's great. Chiefs, Raiders, Saints, Washington football team, Giants, Washington football team, Cardinals. So he's got a couple of tough matchups there, but the rest are really easy. Everybody looks healthy there right now. I think Dak's positioned to take off for the rest of the season. And looking at things from a DFS perspective, right? Like I'm probably going to be playing him a lot as we move forward.
I like it. He was one of my few players that I said could finish his QB1 overall this season. He's got a nice ceiling, and you can see that obviously with his recent weeks. This past week being one of them, 26.34 fantasy points. He's been in that range before week 4 against a good Carolina defense as well. The schedule looks good. I'm with you for Dak Prescott, and you have to be excited about that offense if you are playing him, one of the 2 wide receivers, even though
You don't have to be excited if you're a Giants fan, though.
Unless you're a Giants fan. I had to have that asterisk in there. My old co-host was a big Giants fan too, so I had to be careful with those things.
They can produce in fantasy and still lose the game, So
exactly, that's all I need. That's exactly what I need.
Fair.
Do as great as you want to do, as long as at the end of the day, that the most important numbers, Giants win.
There you go. Dubs and losses. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Ashley, nice getting connected again with you.
Yeah.
Mike, first time we've been on a podcast. Hope to do it again sometime in the near future. Can you guys, we'll go Mike, then Ashley. Can you guys just remind everybody where to find you on social media, and then anything you want to plug that is coming up for you?
Okay, at Mike Reedy FF on Twitter. Thursday, Moneymakers and Heartbreakers will be out, and Thursday evening, Friday morning, the Cheat Sheet DFS podcast will be out that I'm on weekly. Please check those out. I'm begging you.
Moneymakers and Heartbreakers is one of my favorites. I love it.
Thank you.
For me, you could find me on Twitter at Ashley_Marie with 2 A's and Ashley. You can find my content with the Undroppables on the Undroppables TikTok at the Undroppables. You can catch me every Wednesday live. We have a live show every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Undroppables Playbook that I co-host, football podcast. We have that tomorrow, and if you follow at UN Playbook, I'm pretty sure we're going to be doing a mailbag episode soon. But that's about it. I'm always around. I think the best way to describe where you can find me is just around. I'm always around. Around.
All right.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your guys' time. For me, I'll be live tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central, with Kyle Soppe from ESPN. He's taking Kevin's place, who's taking a week off, but that should be a good show. And then on Sunday, for the Fantasy Points Extra Point stream, and then a bunch of random stuff in between. So, again, if you guys listen live, if you guys listen on iTunes, Spotify, whatever the case is, thank you for tuning in. If you are following me by chance on Twitter and not these guys, make sure to change that after you listen to this. And have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. And thanks.